Dave's Bigfoot Show. Local people sharing their local, unexplained encounters with Bigfoot. Our first guest we have, my son David, my daughter Jamie, and my son-in-law Nick Froer. Now, there you go. See that? That's what we're talking about. Tell me what was going on in 1997. Nick, let's just start with Nick on the end.
All right. So it all started, it was late fall, 97, and it all started with Hunter here being in trouble. We had to run him and his, he's married now, but his old girlfriend lived at the...
It was a date.
It was a date, okay, it was a date.
Big difference.
She lived at the bottom of the divide, and we were up here in Eden. It was about midnight, and so anyway, Jamie and I were going to run her home, and so Hunter came with us, and that's where it all started. We zipped over the divide and dropped her off, turned right around, and came right back over the top. About 100 yards over the top of the North Ogden Divide, Jamie said, "Stop, there's something crossing the road, let it pass." And so I slowed way down and rolled my window down, because growing up here you always hear stories of, hey, there's people up there on the divide scaring people and, you know, whatever. So I thought, I'm going to catch this guy dressed up like Bigfoot. And so I slow way down, roll the window down, and it finishes crossing the road, and so there's no doubt in our mind that this is, you know, Bigfoot or somebody like Bigfoot. And I yelled, "Get out of the road," really loud. And
what were you thinking, yelling at Bigfoot? I would not yell at Bigfoot.
Yeah, and so I thought at the time, you know, we had a good escape route. But after I yelled at him, he kind of just never changed his pace as we saw him cross the road and start up the other side. And we were about a lane away from him when I was almost stopped on this side of the divide. It's right there at the steep point on both sides, and he never quit moving or gating, but he kind of turned right after I yelled and looked straight at me as he was walking. And I don't know about these two, but I instantly kind of froze. Hunter?
Yeah, I froze.
The hair on my neck was standing still. In fact, talking about it still gives me the chills, because it was so, it's still like really vivid in my mind, but as far as like when they say the cat's got your tongue, literally we couldn't even speak.
Yeah, and so I think for me it's one of those moments where I'll definitely, hopefully have a chance to go back and check that out.
When we die?
Yeah, when we die and find out what was going on there. But in my mind, I know that wasn't a guy in some suit, and it just seemed natural, the whole experience. And we couldn't even talk about it with each other for over a year.
Over a year. I said, let's get out of here. We just literally were, you know, the divide is scary to drive anyways, but I couldn't wait to get home. We were just shaking, but we were so speechless, we didn't even discuss it for a whole year. Really, the cat got our tongue. That's how scary it was.
Now, David, what time of the year would this have been?
It would have been September, October, kind of in the fall,
Okay.
around there.
How late or early, what time of the day?
It was about 1 o'clock, you know, it had to be 1 o'clock because I was in trouble for being past.
That's why they were driving you. You didn't have your own car. So they took me up there and showed me exactly where this happened, and you're thinking a guy was hiding in the brush and walked out of that brush, walked in front of your car, and then somehow went up the side.
I don't think that's what happened. I don't think, because in the back seat of the car, I have the ability to just kind of look at what's going on and not even pay attention to the road. And so as I'm back there, they have the trailhead at the very top of the North Ogden Divide. And normally you'll see people, cars parked up there, going on night hikes and stuff. And the thing I remember the most is as I'm looking at it, I'm looking to see if there's any cars there, and there wasn't a car at all parked in that parking lot.
Yeah.
And so from them to park a car, hike all the way down to this location of where it happened, in a gorilla suit, it just wouldn't make any sense.
What about, did you see, now, so the lights aren't going to be on when it's walking past you. You're going to just see it's very dim. Did you see any kind of hair or any coloring? Was that, what did you see? What were you thinking on that?
I think, I know you couldn't see the color, but you knew it was dark, it was black color, and you couldn't see a lot of detail when we got close, but you knew it was really dark and it was hairy. You knew it was hair.
It looked real. It didn't look fake. Did it flow with his muscles, his movement?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it flowed just perfectly. If you have like a suit or a costume, you kind of get, wrinkles or baggy, areas.
Yeah.
And it was tall and skinny, or, compared to a gorilla suit, it was like form-fitting, and it moved just perfectly. You couldn't tell one way or another.
Yeah. Now, let's give these guys who laid it out here in front of you a big hand. Woo! Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, Dusty, so they had their experience. Tell us what happened with you on the way to Logan.
1990, I guess that'd be 30 years ago, I was 17. Me, Kurt Hoff, and Clint Robbins, all Valley residents, were going to see my family in Bear Lake. We had an annual trip up there. Anyways, we decided to go through Logan Canyon because as you all know, there is Utah State with college girls up there.
That's why you were there.
So we thought we would drive through Logan and then up through Logan Divide instead of versus Monte Cristo. So we got to the top of Logan Divide and Kurt Hoff turns and says, I need to go to the bathroom really bad. And when Kurt says that, he's got to go.
He's got to go.
So anyways, I pulled my car up to the side of the road by one of those mountaintops, and then we walked around the side where you could not see the road, about 100 feet, maybe 100 yards. And all three of us were just going to the bathroom in the private. And if any of you guys know Kurt, probably not many of you, Bart or Bo, when he got excited, he stuttered. So we were sitting there and all of a sudden Kurt just started stuttering. He couldn't talk. And so Clint and I looked up, and Kurt had his hand out like this, and up towards the top of this canyon was a tall, dark brown, about 700 yards out, walking through the scattered pines, upright, and a fast gait. And we watched him walk for probably 2 minutes, 5 minutes maybe, speechless. In fact, I don't even think we finished our business. And kind of like Jamie and Nick and your boy was saying, we have never ever discussed it since, because it's kind of like, what do you talk about and who's going to believe you? But it was really cool. It wasn't scary because we were
How far away were you?
700 yards or better.
Yeah.
But I couldn't see real close detail being that far away. But
how fast was it moving? I mean, was it running? Was it walking, or like a lope? Or
I would say a good fast horse walk, maybe 4 to 5 miles per hour.
Yeah.
Faster than a normal human, or me anyways. I'm short, but pretty good walk. Yep. So pretty boring story really, but it was fun, and it did not at all look set up, and especially the area we're in. The general public on the highway could not see up to the head of that canyon. And it was about midday, July 1990, and I just figured if somebody was going to be playing a prank.
1970.
90.
That's only well, that's
Oh, 20
years
years,
ago.
20 years. I went, yeah, I'm not good
Yeah.
with math. But anyways,
Anyways.
so it didn't strike me as a place where somebody would be playing a prank because nobody could see up into the top of that canyon.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But I have been pranked on North Ogden Divide by kids in gorilla suits, and you can tell.
Yeah, you can.
You can tell, and they're fun. Kim was with me once. We had a good time with those guys.
Well, there you go. I'll tell you what. Dusty, thanks for coming. There's a real person, a real experience. That's something. Give him a big hand.
Scary stories tonight. I am going to play a piece from my Traveler album, and I recorded this with my husband, who is now deceased, and I am going to perform it with him tonight because he recorded this before he passed away. So, scary stories. That's not too scary. But I would like to give credit to the Ellison Franklin band that used to play together. We played from 1992 to 2005. No longer together, and I'm moving on. And so the credit goes to Jim Logue, who wrote this piece, and it's called New Prairie. And I'm going to have a poem read that was written specially for this piece because it is instrumental, and it was written by Lori Pace. This is Mr. David Jenkins.
After wind and fire pass, leaving only the scorched earth in their wake, the land is black and bare as far as the eye can see. And yet, as I look more closely, I see new shoots of green pushing up through the ashes like single notes of music. Given time, the healing progresses, and the prairie is renewed, becoming a symphony of life and color. Even so, my life.
we've come up over the divide, we've gone into Logan Canyon, and now we're going to talk about North Fork. So give us a little background and tell us about that. Let's give Vernon a hand, because this is a big deal for him to come.
This experience was not my own, but relayed to me by my father. It was in the summer of '75. We had completed the cabin up North Fork in about '72, '73. So we were starting to utilize the cabin by staying up there overnight. I was in high school. My dad has always been kind of like the person that took care of all the leases of the land for sheep and cattle grazing by different ranchers. Anyway, this particular, because he had such a fond love of the property, he always would go down at in the night after dark and make sure the gate to the property was locked, and then he'd come back. He had a Honda 90, and this one particular night I was there at the cabin with my mom, and I said, "Dad, why don't we just drive the Jeep down? I'll go with you." And he said, "No, I'm used to doing this all on my own. I can go down and do it. It's only a mile and a half down there." And I said, "Okay." I said, "I'll just wait here with Mom then." And he took off. He was gone quite a long time. And we started getting a little bit nervous because he didn't come. But he came back to the cabin, and he was very quiet. My dad's not a very quiet man. He was very quiet, subdued, looked like he'd seen a ghost. But he didn't talk much. He wouldn't talk to my mom much about it. Well, it was the next morning, we went out to water the pine trees. He planted a bunch of new pine trees, and we went out, and I said, "So, Dad, you're acting pretty strange. What's going on?" And he didn't want to say a whole lot. In fact, he didn't really go into a lot of detail that very day. He told me a little bit about it, skipped about it, but a couple of years later, he finally really told me what was going on. It was when I had gotten married and now was working for the county surveyor's office. And so I was spending a lot of time up in the woods. We surveyed the county line all the way through, clear through Monte Cristo, from out by the lake. So anyway, I spent a lot of time in the woods, and he finally opened up to me and told me this story. He told me that on his way back up from checking the gate, that he was going along, and the Honda 90 just stopped. It just killed. So there's no lights, there's no, he was like, "What's wrong with this?" Did I run out of gas? So he's down there fiddling with it, putting it in reserve, and he says this just didn't make sense, that it would just die. And while he was sitting there fiddling with putting it on reserve, thinking, is there gas in there, taking the gas cap off, he had heard something in the trees, and he thought it was somebody walking down the road, but they were not on the road. They were off 10 feet or so off the road. And then he realized this was more than just a person. This was a very tall individual. He couldn't actually see much detail. He asked the person who he was, and the person wouldn't respond. But he relayed this to my dad. He says, he actually knew my dad's name. He said, "Albert." And he said, "I want to relay a very special thing to you right now." He says, "This land is very special. The valley below this land is very special. It's reserved for the latter days." That was all he said to him. My dad wanted to ask him more questions, but he didn't respond to anything. He wouldn't ask him or tell him who he was. My dad said, "Who are you? Come out so I can see you." He wouldn't do that. But the movement through the trees, he stood there. I don't know, my dad, I think, talked to him for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, but he would not show himself. And then he left. So I believe that's covered everything. What
did your dad ever say any more about it than what he told you initially?
Like I said, the morning out watering the pine trees, when I went out there and helped him, he alluded to a little bit of the story, and then it was several years later when I was married and working for the county that he finally opened up. I believe he held it back from my mom for about 5 years before he let her know the full story of what happened that night.
Did she ever talk about it with you?
She never talked to me about it. My dad felt like it was kind of a private thing. My dad's he's not a scared person. He was a truck driver, and he had many people that tried to commandeer his trucks during his early years, so he's not afraid of anybody. In fact, he pulled his 45 many times on people, so he's not afraid. But that really shook him up pretty good. But he, at that point, because of the message that he got from this individual, or this thing, or creature, he became very protective of the property. He almost took it to the extreme because of this experience.
Would he have had a gun at the time?
No, he did not.
Okay.
Sometimes he took it, sometimes not, but I recall that he did not have the gun at that time.
Yeah. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is kind of beyond Bigfoot. That's why I thought the story was so interesting and the experience was so interesting, because there isn't any place where Bigfoot's communicated with anybody other than just in a yell or scream or whatever. So this experience was more than a Bigfoot experience. And about how old was your dad when he passed away?
My dad was 77, so this would have been probably, he was in his late 50s, early 60s.
How old would you have been?
I was about 17.
17.
18.
Interesting. Now, there was another experience different than that one. Go ahead. Oh, he's talking about North Fork, which is right over on that end of the valley. So you folks in North Fork, I know you'll appreciate that story.
If you know Camp Utah, it's about half a mile up from Camp Utah.
There was another experience you had with your cousin. Tell us about that one. This is different.
Okay. I believe I was about 12, 13 years old, so I don't recall. It was during the summer. My cousin and I, my cousin Royal Eccles, had just moved up from California. We spent a lot of time discovering the property. Our family spent a lot of time up there. Before we even had cabins up there, we just spent a lot of time riding motorcycles up and down the road and picnics up there. And we were having a picnic up there this one time, and Royal and I decided to take off and go down the road on our Honda 55. I don't know if you remember, they look like the early Honda 90s. Yeah. Anyway, we go down. Now, before we used to have to cross 3 rivers. We used to have to cross the river 3 times. So this was actually on the second river crossing, but now it's actually the first river crossing because things have changed. They rerouted the road. So we were crossing the second river, and my cousin killed the 55. Now that sounds kind of strange because my dad's motorcycle stopped. Well, my cousin killed it because we were crossing a river and it flooded it.
Yeah.
So anyway, so he's sitting there, I'm on the back, and he's sitting there trying to kickstart it. And I look to my left, and there by a rock, there's a big tall rock, and the river kind of pools by it, was a gentleman, a man, a very hairy man, was standing there. And I was freaked out, and he was obviously taking a bath. And he said, "Hello there." And that's all he said. And I was so freaked out, I was tapping my cousin on the back and said, "Hey, check this out." I was speechless. I was scared to death. And he saw him, and just about that time that he saw him, he got the motorcycle started. And I tell you, we split pretty fast out of there. Yeah. We went up there and told our parents about it. They all came down to try and find this gentleman. We never found him. We couldn't find him. So it was just really weird that he was a pretty old guy, lots of hair.
No.
Well, you know, it's on the Rock River base. You know, you're not going to find tracks. We didn't really go off. We just tried to ride up and down the road, see if we could see him, see if we could find out if he was walking on the road, off through the trees or whatever. We couldn't find him.
Now, on Dave's Bigfoot Show Edition 2, we've got an experience of the Wildman of North Fork, and it's that guy. So that's a whole other story, but we've just given you a little taste of it. Let's give Vernon a big hand for him coming up. Thank you so much for doing that. Thank you. this is one of those experiences when I said, if you've had a family member have seen a Bigfoot, the chances that another family would have had an experience. This is a perfect example. 3 completely different experiences, and with brothers and a sister. So welcome to Dave's Bigfoot Show, Bob Sanders. Hey. Woo! Hello there. When you need a guy to fix stuff, this is the guy. He can do it all.
All right, I don't recognize any faces, so I guess I can get started.
Yeah. Tell us the experience, kind of set the stage on where and what time it was, what year.
What this was is it was back in 1978, 79, and that time frame is, I was about 13 years old. I was docking sheep up in Cottonwood. If anybody knows where that's at, you got to go up Ogden Canyon. It's up by the Browning building up there where Browning Arms is made. Then you go back in there, you go through some Dearden property, and then up into Byram's property. There was 4 of us in, well, let me back up. That was in 1978, 79 again. So we were driving up there, going up to dock sheep. It was about 7 o'clock in the morning, and driving along, and all of a sudden, we was just getting ready to cross the top of this hillside in this road, and that is when the Bigfoot that we had seen actually crossed in front of us. We all kind of looked at each other and wondered, you know, what we had saw, what the heck was that? And I think every one of us kind of realized that it definitely wasn't a bear or a man in a suit at 7 o'clock at that time in the morning and where we were at. We went up there and we got done docking the sheep, and even at that time, I mean, you know, we'd look at each other, but nobody had made a comment to one another. Even to this day, the only one that I've ever made a comment to, or that we've ever talked to it, which was here 2 days ago on the phone, I had called up a man by the name of Val Byram, who was the owner of the sheep and who we were up there with. So I called him and I says, hey, I says, remember back when we were up in the mountains and we were working up there? And he says, yeah. He says, back when we saw Bigfoot. I says, yeah, back when we saw Bigfoot. I says, do you have the paper writing of when that was? His wife had actually put that in the newspaper, and he said that he didn't keep it, but I do know that my mom's got one still. She's kept everything from when she was knee-high to a turtle, I'll tell you. So, but we talked about it a bit, and it was quite a thing, because that was in about the same time, and I've never talked to my family much about this. My mom, you know, real quick when that happened, I was in school, and so you can imagine if people asked if that was me, I denied it, because it was something that you really didn't want to talk about.
Yeah.
So when Dave brought this up, you know, we started talking, and I had actually had a brother who had, when it had went through South Weber, and I don't know if many of you remember when it had went through South Weber, and I lived in South Weber at that time, and there was a few people that had actually, I don't know anybody else who actually had a sighting because it was at night. That was with a guy by, well, there was a Smith. I really shouldn't be saying first names, but there was a Smith that was up there who actually had the burnt stew that he had set out the back, and I don't remember, I'm almost positive it was his horses. When that had went through there, and I'm sure Dave will give you this story about my brother who actually didn't get the sighting, but had went up there and seen the tracks, which was kind of interesting. So that was about the same time.
Now, you were in the truck. It was 7 o'clock in the morning. What about the color? Was the color the same? Was there a difference of color, say, down the back? Because a lot of the witnesses will say something like that. Or was it something that just was so out of the ordinary that didn't register?
You know, it's something that doesn't ever leave your mind. I'd never even talked about this even with my wife up until a few years ago. My kids never knew anything about it up until probably a couple, and I just kind of toy with them when somebody had made a comment, and they'd say, well, do you believe? Yeah, I believe, and it's very hard for somebody to believe something like this, even from the stories, so basically all you can have is faith that we believe it, like I have faith in you love your mother. Yeah. So it's one of them things that's, if you see it, you're 100%. There's not any 99% chance I was, sure that I saw it. I did, You know what you see. Color-wise was something that we got probably, I would guess, it seemed like a minute, but I'm sure that it was only within a few seconds of when we actually saw it, and it had come across in front of us. It was about 50 yards away when it passed, and the dark color is what I remember. So you got to remember that this is something that, I every once in a while I think about, but I don't ever, ponder on the situation.
Would it have been dark enough to need headlights at that time of the day?
No, we were definitely very close to where we were ending up to the sheep herds that was up there.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting. Let's give Bob Sanders.
Thank you.
He's not making it up. He did not start with it once upon a time. Thank you very much, Bob. So this next guest, thanks, buddy. Oh, man. Now there's a job for Bigfoot. Yeah, you don't have to worry about... Yeah, get some of that hair sticking on me. Yeah, man, I'll tell you what. Oh, that's great. That is great. Now people don't believe in Bigfoot. Charlie always announces himself as the smarter one of the bunch. He was just the more spoiled. And the fellow that had this experience is out of town, so wasn't able to, but so Charlie took the experience, and he is going to give that information and that experience for us. Very interesting one.
I want you to know I'm responsible for having Bigfoot here, because that's the only sighting that I've ever had for Bigfoot. I was at the canyons, and I walked up, and Bigfoot started walking in front of me, and I said, "You've got to come to Dave's Bigfoot show." Of course, he couldn't talk, but the very beautiful girl that was taking him around said, "Call me." So I did, and Bigfoot's here
there
today.
He is.
So that was awesome. Thanks, do. Bigfoot.
Yeah.
The story came about for me was I was sharing Nick's story about the North Ogden Divide to a good friend. And he said, "Well, let me share my story with you." And I said, "That is the coolest Bigfoot story I've ever heard." And I started telling that one to everybody instead of the other one. And so when David said, "Why don't you come share that story up here?" I was happy to do it. And the funnest thing was to keep rehashing the story that started out as a camping trip, a 3 or 4 day camping trip up in the Uintas. Those of you who've had an opportunity to go to the Uintas up at the Twin Lakes area, it's quite high elevation. The 3 young men, 17, 12, and 10-year-old boys, were heading up there with their dad for a nice camping trip high in the Uintas. So as they set camp at Twin Lakes, they were out running around the basin and throwing rocks, running around, jumping in the lake, and just what kids do. And one of the comments was that there was nobody else around, no other campers. That was the only people they saw were their party, and that was it. So as the evening draw to a close, of course, you build your big campfire and you get ready to have your dinner, and which they did. And as it started getting dark, they could hear some branches breaking around them. And so, as boys would do, they thought, "Oh, there's a moose out there somewhere." So they would run out into the woods, and then the branches would be breaking further away from them. So they'd run back into camp, and then they get their flashlights, and then they would hear it on the other side of camp a little bit later. So they would run into the bushes and the trees, and then the crashing would go further away. So they could never get up to it. And this happened throughout the night as they were sitting around the campfire, and they were having a good time thinking they'd see a moose. Well, it kept going on, and they started noticing something was kind of interesting as they started hearing wood hit together very loudly. And it was as if two large branches were getting smashed together. But not only was it just outside of their camp, they could hear the same noise across the lake on the other side. So they said, that's kind of weird. Maybe we better stay close to camp now instead of running out into the woods trying to see something. And as they bedded down that night, it was a clear night. The moon was out, very bright, with no hint of rain. So the rain fly was actually off the tent. And the top of the tent was a netting that a lot of you slept in there where you can see out perfectly because it's just a small net up there. And as they were sleeping, he awoke and noticed the other members of the party staring out to the right side of the tent. And as they were staring, they noticed a figure that was out there, described at about 7 to 8 feet tall, with kind of a cone shape, not a cone, but a, what would you call this?
A cone.
A cone. Not a cone, but a ridge on its head as it went up to a point, like a ridge. No hair around the face, lips, eyes blinking, color of the eyes, I'll answer this question, was red. And they said they sat there and watched it pace out about a half circle and come back, and pace out around and come back. But at the same time, previously when they were chasing into the woods, this horrible odor that smelled like garbage was there right next to them that they had smelled when they were running into the woods. And as it paced around, it was making all kinds of breathing noises like a bull you would see at a rodeo. Really deep, very heavy, and he was described as having very long, hairy arms, broad shoulders, 3 times thicker than a normal man, huge traps, hair coming down the traps, very long arms, very big, very stinky. So as 45 minutes had gone by with this particular experience, and they went to bed. Make sure I'm not missing something here. They went to bed and of course didn't get very much sleep that night. When they woke up in the morning, they basically did, well, when they got out of their tent, when the light came, they automatically started just packing up, rolling sleeping bags. The dad was the first one to do that. The kids were just following, nobody saying anything, and they just started packing up and heading out and noticing around the camp it's like a tornado had come through. There were branches everywhere. But the one in particular, some of the branches were almost 10 feet high, and some of them were 5 inches in diameter, were green, twisted, and then broken off. As David said, the strength of someone to be able to do that alone, to break the green branches, and the branches were strewn all over the campsite, and also the footprints of about 18 inches, 17 to 18 inches were tracked all throughout their camp. So it didn't take much for this 3-4 day camp to end in one day. They went down, and the comment was, one of the boys said to the older one, "What was that?" And they said, "We don't need to talk about it." And they didn't for a long time. And that's the story.
That's great.
That's great. Thank you so much. Well, there's another experience that didn't start with "It was a dark and stormy night" or "Once upon a time." We want to welcome Joe Jesperson. Let's give him a big hand. Thanks for coming up, buddy. And just hold that right against your chin. Joe, tell us a little background on what's going on.
I'm born and raised in Colorado, about 30 minutes directly west of Denver, and about 30 minutes east of Vail. If anybody's ever been up into the high country of Colorado, grew up on 70 acres, grew up around wildlife, deer, cougars even, mountain bears and whatnot. And I was still am, I enjoy backpacking, but was really big into backpacking back in 1999. And took a trip with a few of my buddies from high school. We just graduated and decided to take a trip up to a long backpacking trip, about 10-15 miles back into an area right below Mount Evans, which is a 14,000 foot mountain in Colorado, to a glacier lake called Chicago Lakes. Beautiful area. Again, we from the parking area, it's about a 15-mile, pretty rigorous backpacking hike into these glacier lakes. So we went and did it on an afternoon, in an early morning actually. Got back in there. It was a cold day. It was in June, but it was a cold day, and at 13,000 feet, the temperature drops even more. We get back in there. We set up camp early afternoon. We sit around, enjoying the campfire. We cook dinner and whatnot. Set up. Our tents are ready to go. As night falls, we go to bed. We bed down. We were going to stay there for 2 days, doing some fishing, doing some other hiking, and just really enjoying the high country. We bed down, and I would say no less than 15-20 minutes after we get settled into our tents, we all of us obviously we hear a very loud scream from what would be across the valley. Now, we were up in a glacier at Chicago Lakes. It's a glacier lake, and it's in a basin. It's in the basin literally on the backside of Mount Evans. So we hear this scream that comes from across the valley. I would say maybe a quarter mile, half mile distance from where we were camped on the shore of this lake, and it was a very loud scream. And as I mentioned, I grew up on 70 acres. I grew up listening to elk. I grew up listening to bear growls. We'd have bears cross through our property all the time. I grew up listening to cougar screams, and I can tell you that it was not anything that I'd ever heard. Now, it doesn't stop there. We heard the scream, and about I would say 2-3 minutes later, we heard what I would guess, or what we all thought, was a response come from behind us, or on the other side of the valley wall. Again, this is 13,500 feet high, right at timberline, extremely high altitude, and very cold. We hear the response. 2 minutes, 3 minutes later goes by, and we hear what we estimate to be a third scream come from down the valley, down the canyon, down from where we had hiked up. And that went on between the three, whatever it was, that went on for about 20-25 minutes. The three of them would call out to each other periodic, to about 2, 3, 4 minute intervals, back and forth. They would get closer. What it sounded like, they would get closer to our camp, get further away, get closer, further away, and then it just stopped. No, we didn't think much of it. There was actually four of us. I remember when I spoke to you on the phone, you asked me to recall this. There was 4 of us there, and we didn't think much of it. We were a little scared. We decided to cut our trip short. We decided to cut our trip short. And in the morning, we woke up. We looked around. There was no evidence of any animals, of any breakage or foliage, or there was no evidence of that. We had breakfast and we packed up and we went home. Now, when I got home, I decided to do some research. I've heard cougars, I've heard bears, I've heard all sorts of wildlife screaming and making their calls. Wolves, coyotes, I've heard them all. I've hunted coyotes. I get home and it was and decided to hop up on the internet. Now this was 1999, so we didn't have broadband internet where we lived, and the internet wasn't what it is today. In 1999, we had dial-up, so I dialed up onto the internet and decided to search around for animal calls, wild animal calls, Colorado. I had no idea. Maybe I didn't even think the name Bigfoot didn't even come to my mind. Couldn't really find anything. And somehow, and I can't even remember how I landed on it. I landed on an audio file from some guy that claims to have captured an audio file of a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot call out of Iowa. It's a very famous audio file for Bigfooters out there. I don't even know what it's called, but a guy out of Iowa, claims to have caught this on file. I listened to it. It's maybe 15 seconds long. If you Google it, you'll find it. And it was very distorted. Couldn't really understand it. And talked about it a little bit with my friends. We didn't think much of it. I figured it was just a bizarre animal, perhaps Bigfoot, perhaps not. And always shared the story. Really wasn't embarrassed to share it. 10, 15 years pass, and Dave Jr., who I work with, mentions that there's going to be a Bigfoot show. So I talked to you, Dave, and you tell me to go to your website, and so I did that. Went to the website, and you have a YouTube video on there of some gentleman that took an audio file out of Sequoia National Park, Teton or Sequoia National Park. I'm not sure which one.
Yeah, I think Sequoia.
Yeah, Sequoia National Park, and. So I played that one evening after I talked to you on the phone. My wife was at work, my daughter was in bed, and I played that audio file, and a chill went up my spine. I'm not even kidding you. It took me hours to get to bed that night because that is identical to what to the screams that we had heard. If I was to describe the scream, and I explained this to Dave, it was almost a manufactured scream. It was almost a digitized scream, like somebody had taken a couple different files, MP3 files together, meshed them together, and was playing them around the Valley of Chicago Lakes in Summit County, Colorado.
Did it go? Did it stay at a level, or did it go up or down?
It definitely crescendoed. It did go up very, very quick. It started out as a growl and ended as a high pitched scream. So it started deep and went up high.
Oh, that's great. How you like that? Nothing wrong with that story.
Thanks, Joe, for coming. That's great.
Now, this next one, Jason, I said, can I use your name? Okay, and he says, yeah, Jason Furnace, Treasure Furnace. Jason Treasure is his name, and Treasure Furnace. And I had 2 or 3 people say, you have to talk to him about his experience up at China Meadows, and that is on the north slope of the Uintas. Is that correct? Is anybody familiar with China Meadows? Is that right? That's right. Listen to this. He said he was about 20 years old when this happened, and it would have been late 80s, early 90s. He's hunting elk with a bow and arrow, north slope of the Uintas, with a hunting party of 4. And another interesting thing, there's only 2 people in this whole presentation tonight that were without other witnesses with them. There's only 2. And he has 4 with him, and Bob had 4, and Barbara had, she's one of the only ones, but there was, she was in a hunting party, so it's not like there weren't people with her. But I think that's interesting that there's always more than just one. This was early in the evening. I was in a clearing looking into trees on the side of a hill when I saw something coming toward me. And he says it was 7 to 8 feet tall, about 350 or 400 pounds. It was dark in color and about 150 yards away. So he said it is moving and it's speeding up as it goes. and it covered 75 yards in just no time. And it started out a fast walk and then increased its speed. It covered the 75 yards in an instant. And when I asked him, this was kind of funny, I asked him, I said, Jason, what happened to the creature at the 75-yard mark? And guess what he said? I don't know. I was running and I was not looking back. He was out of there. He said that was scary, and I know what I saw, and he said, I'll stand by this experience. That was not a guy in a suit for sure. And that would be kind of half spooky. So I'm asking my buddy, and many of you will know him, I'll just say, is Bob here with the beard? Probably not. And he's an outdoors guy. He's kind of been and done everything. He lives kind of over in the Eden Liberty area, North Fork area. And I said, in my mind, surely Bob's going to have some experiences. So I saw him at the Maverick and said, Bob, you know, we're looking for people that have had experiences with unexplainable things. Things that you just can't get your mind around, and related to kind of Bigfoot possibly, but unexplainable things. Have you ever had any of those experiences? And he says, without hesitation at all, very sober. I couldn't see his lips move because his beard is so heavy. He says, Carver, I saw two naked women running in the mountains a while ago, and I can't explain that. And I said, Bob, I'm telling your story. It's going to be the shortest, but by far the funniest. So he hasn't seen anything that we're talking about, but he still can't get his mind around that other one.